So we're going to talk about starting a new project. This is a stage of development that we all care about. Each of us as programmers, each of us as developers, we look to be able to make decisions in projects, and we always want to work in a new project, not necessarily entering projects that already have rules, standards, code, and we just have to go in and adapt to this stage, to this technology, to this decision that somebody else made. So we're going to talk about what this stage is about and how we can make it easier in development. But as we know, not everything is very easy because in every project there are relevant decisions that do not only affect you as developers, but to all the team and even the client. So we're going to talk about how we avoid to repeat ourselves. This talk, if it had an alternate title, it would be about what you can do and what not to do in each project. So we are going to divide it in this way. We are going to discuss what is the issue, the situation that we find ourselves, the proposals and tools that we can find, what are the do's and don'ts, and we are going to have a very short demo, and finally the questions and answers. Before describing the issue, or before starting describing the issue, I would like to put ourselves in different positions that I am sure that we are identifying ourselves, and I am sure that we can identify with these as developers. We're always looking for a new project. This is a general situation for us. But when we start thinking about it and we start making the first decisions, we realize that it is more work. We should plan the architecture. What is the first stage? What the folder structure, the file structure, the initial configuration, the documentation, the testing, everything. So we cannot start a project without defining these things. And at the middle of a project, we're always talking about technical debt. If we start a project wrong, the technical debt is going to start from day one. We cannot begin without documentation, without testing, because we will begin with technical debt. This is a situation that is very common and that we have found ourselves many times. This is me in a meme. We are working in a new project and we come up with a new idea, and since we do not want to forget about it, we start working on it. So we start a new project and we left the others behind. So who does not have a catalog of projects in your GitHub, a set of projects that are half finished, that are great ideas, but they haven't seen the light because we just thought of another idea in the middle of this project. And this is a very common situation. Starting up these ideas brings forward this repetition of tasks that we're talking about. So with each new project, we will be doing things well from the beginning. We are using the right framework, not the most popular one or the one recommended by our cousin or a friend. It is because it is the right decision, or that we think. Sorry for the background noise. I think that this is the right decision, or even earlier, we start to validate something new. We want to add a library, a framework, or something new to this problem. So we end up starting a sub-project within the project. And we are just leaving aside the final goal. Many of us really forget in the middle of the project what was the initial goal of this project. So this is a very common situation. With each new project, we also have the requirements, and the requirements need to be clear. This is something that we have always looking for. Who hasn't discussed this with a manager, with the product team, with the client themselves, because it is not clear what we have to do. And as developers, we really want to have a clear idea of what they are looking for, what we have to develop, instead of finding out for ourselves what is what we want. So we are always trying to look for requirements that are clear and well defined. But once the project starts, we realize that something that seemed clear starts to have many probabilities, many ramifications, and it is not so simple. It's not a straightforward path as we had planned. Fifth situation, it depends on the project. The priorities depend on the project. You probably see this this graphic about a safe, fast, and good program. And some projects have a priority as a cost. Some projects have cost as a priority, speed as a priority. Some would like to have it finished right now. Some would have to want to use a specific technology because it is the one that the client is going to maintain. Some of us have full freedom to choose the technology. And in some of us, we will have probably decision making skills or free will. Not everywhere we will have it, but we cannot assume that what worked in our previous project is going to be the same as this project or that we will be able to replicate it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like this. Every project has different variables, and this is something very interesting to us as developers, as programmers, to be able to apply and replicate what has worked for us, but in a new project with a different variable. And sixth and last situation, we are in a new project and we say, well, why do I reinvent the same thing all over again? I remember that I did this already, so why don't I just bring it and implement it? And so we realized that perhaps it was very specific to that other project. Perhaps it had mistakes that we had not identified. So we bring it over with bugs and all. And as we developed earlier, perhaps we do not remember exactly how it worked. But this is also a very common situation to bring things over that we have already used in other projects. With these 6 situations, what am I trying to say here? So the startup of a project, this is a situation that we're looking for and we are waiting for, and this is why we became developers. But this is not really easy, as I said before. It is not a honeymoon. There are going to be situations where we're going to find ourselves doing the same tasks all over and over and over again. So we're going to repeat ourselves, and we will have weeks and perhaps months before we can show an initial product so that the client can see the advance. And the first 2 weeks of every project is the same thing. So, hey, what are you doing? I can't see anything. And it is not that you haven't done anything, it's that this initial work, the connections, the folder structure, initial validations, the development of the API, this is all the same all over and over again. And we will have 2 weeks before we can begin to show something that everyone can see. So I am sure that you have identified yourself with these situations. In each initial stage of the project, we can determine or we can find out, and this is a very quick number that I have obtained in several example projects when I see the example lines of code, the time it took to arrive to this first prototype. You can take perhaps 10 to 50% of the time in this initial stage of the effort, more than the time. In the first 2 weeks, where you have to do all this planning, all this structure, all this validation, authentication, etc. So why do not automate this project startup with tools that can already exist or that we can create custom made? We're going to talk about 3 specific proposals, and I'm going to center in the last for a quick demo, but we're going to talk about 3 proposals. First, there is not a perfect solution, not a tool that can solve all problems, and that's good because we would be out of a job if there were. But from this, we can divide this in 3 proposals. The first is frameworks. So a framework, what it does is to help us develop a project in a specific technology. And these tools, beside including a set of commands that are going to make easier our work or to reduce the line of codes, They also implement a development philosophy to follow and a set of basic rules that we are going to structure our projects around. They have a lot of advantages. They make our job easier and faster, implement code standards. If we choose correctly, we will implement and follow good practices in the code. And many implement command lines in interfaces or third party integrations. And on the other hand, there are no tools that are pros only. We have to compromise with a few things. Some things have additional weight. All this functionality that I don't have to do that allows me to focus directly in the business rules have weight. They are there, and the fact that I don't do them does not mean that they do not exist. The bundle that generates the project is far heavier. That's if something that we have created ourselves. So we have to give up control and we are going to depend on somebody else. We can see how the folder of modules is the largest folder because those are the dependencies of the dependencies of our dependencies. And in many cases, and perhaps it is not like this in every framework, in many cases, to think outside the box and of the implementation of the framework, it is not the easiest task. I remember a specific case in which a project that was in a specific framework, implementing variations to get out of the framework or the box that I already had, handling authentication and permissions. It wasn't easy. At some point in the project, we had decided we wished that we didn't use that framework for this requirement in particular, but it is not like that in every framework, and it is not this part of the decision making that we have to do. And to show some examples, we have Angular, Vue.js, React, because by themselves, well, we do not consider that a framework, but it doesn't work on itself by itself. And the set of tools enter in this category. Just as Bootstrap, it is not a development framework, but it has a lot of components that provides us with things that make our job easier. So if we go to backend, we have more options, but we have a lot to choose from. And that is the point, what makes easier our task. So it is not only taking this decision because it's the framework I already know, or it's the one that my work team has been using. As we decide the language, the framework is also an important decision. Is this the right framework? What do I need? Do I need to develop it fast or to have more control over the lines of code? And not with every project we are going to use the same. A second point, another set of tools that can make our job easier, and this is to keep the client, calm them down. And this is the wireframes. This is a tool that's also called a blueprint and are visual guides of our project. They show the features, the flows of an application or a website without dedicating too much time in the fine development of these features. We normally use them to plan the design and the functionality of our application. And let us see how they are going to fit and how they're going to move from components. And to mention some tools, we have Draw.io. As programmers, I think that is the one that we use the most, not only for wireframes, but also the flow diagrams and the architecture diagrams that we can use and define with these tools. We also have other tools such as Miro, where we can define workflows, and Adobe XD, Figma, that's another collaboration tool, and Sketch, which allow us to make detailed design based in vectors. So we have different options based in tools that are going to take us away from code, but there are also development. And the third point and the focus of this demo is Generator. It's a tool that is going to allow us to create the base structure of a project, the generic structure of a project, which is through perhaps command lines or a config file. among others. So we're going to be based on the schematics that we already have. The project generator is a tool that allows us to create a boilerplate or the scaffolding of a project, which is the base structure, the foundations of a project. What are the first dependencies, the first and simple CRUDs? And something important to mention is that we need to consider these tools to develop specific projects. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to devote our time to see what is the methodology, what are the fine lines, and what that is what we want to do. This is what we want to do, and that's the challenge that we're facing in each project. But the repetitive tasks, that initial configuration, that documentation, the first CRUDs to administrate, to manage users and tasks, it's pointless to make them again because we have made them before and we have a project structure that allowed us to work, and why not consider it for another different project? And it is worth mentioning here that no project is going to look the same as another, and that's good because it is going to allow us to be entertained with each project, because otherwise it is going to become tedious, and this is what we want to avoid. An example, which is a very popular and most used, is Yeoman. This is a tool to create the scaffolding of a project, and this allows us to integrate npm, gulp, and this is what defines the initial scaffolding. But what we're going to do is a little demo here with a tool that was created for demo purposes. So we're going to show what a generator is, what a project generator is. It is a tool that may exist already, or we can develop one for practical purposes or to implement the same structure that we have used in previous projects, but now in new projects. So that's the startup of a project. So what we're going to do is to define a structure of a project, and we're just going to specify some tasks that are going to have a title, a date, they're going to have a status. And perhaps we can think of a scheme that has events with names, a date. Perhaps they're going to have a venue. And we're going to talk about a project of node. This consists of taking a config file to generate a project that only takes a few seconds. And this project, we can configure it. I just don't want you to connect to this, but to generate a new project, we are going to define the variables. We are going to install the dependencies of this new project. And we are going to ensure to have these entities in our database. And again, this is a small demo. It's an example. It is not an application. It does not have a purpose, a goal in production. But we have users, we have to-dos, we have events. And what we want to do is that through a simple command, we would like to create a project that allows us to define that initial structure that in a few seconds, it can have a functional API with all the endpoints that we have defined, with all the structures that we have defined, that allows us to connect with a system or create, through this example, something like Swagger, but perhaps creating users or creating tasks or creating events, depending on what we want to achieve. But this is the goal, that we do not have to repeat ourselves and to be able to make our job easier just in seconds, to create a new project without the need to dedicate weeks or even months to define this initial structure. So the goal of this is to create a project, the startup of a project, to avoid repeating ourselves all over. And that was the small demo. And to close and to have a few minutes for questions and answers, I have some recommendations. Something that I recommend for each project is that you never stop learning, to share what we have learned with others, and to share and to allow us to know, to learn from others. Never stop practicing. There are not excellent programmers, but as long as we do not practice, we are not going to improve. So never stop self-critiquing. This is something that I recommend a lot. And I have said this a lot, but 6 months after this, you will have to look back to the code you created today. And nowadays, you will have to critique the code that you created 6 months back. If you can say that you have improved from the last time that you did this, and if you can't even make fun of the code that you did 6 months back, you are not improving. And this is what we want to do. And finally, you need to automate what you can to avoid repeating yourself all over again for each project. So, with that, I will leave you and I would like to hear or read some of your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.